Hi, this is Doug Vogt from the Die-Hole Foundation. This is video 2C, the third in the series, explaining what the Torah is and also the model that created the Hebrew alphabet. So far from the previous video 2B, you should have realized that this is the product of an extremely highly advanced previous civilization, and Moses, a late Bronze Age man, did not create them. He says so. He says when he brought the tablets out of the cave, he says, this is the writing of God and the words of God. In other words, he didn't create the design of the letters, and he didn't do the sequence of letters on those tablets he pulled out of the cave. So anyway, in this video I'm going to briefly go over the science philosophy that created the letters, and then the shapes that, the three shapes that the 22 letters form. And then we're going to replace the letters in the Torah for these 22 planes, is what they are. And then finally we're going to do the current schematics of quantum computing. Because remember, the book, Creation of the Hebrew Alphabet, was indexed by the Library of Congress QA 76.8A9, which is quantum computing. They're not kidding. And then I also try to look for repeating patterns in the Torah if it gives you a better idea of what it really is. And also basically tell at the end is what the Torah actually is. So let's get started. I'll be working from chapter 4 in God's Judgement book. That's where I was 10, 11 years ago. And chapters 2, 6, 7 in the Appendix A on the current book, Creation of the Hebrew Alphabet. It's designed, this video is going to be both for computer scientists, physicists, mathematicians, as well as theologians, Christians or Jews. And you'll understand what some of the mythologies are about the Torah and why it would be true. The basic philosophy behind the thing, how the letters are formed, is this is my graph of how matter comes into this dimension. This is the information's dimension. When it crosses the x-axis, it creates proton or neutron, neutron, proton, doesn't matter. It's the same thing except 180 degrees out of phase from each other. And that's the principle of what you're going to see. So keep in mind this graph here. Every single one of the letters is when the carrier wave crosses the x-axis and creates the matter world. So it's creating an atom. And let's say this atom, well in this case, I know it's a carbon atom. That's why there's 12 prophets or 12 members of the family, and 12 is mentioned so many times because the weight of carbon is 12. Anyway, if you put a dot on the ball and that matched that graph you saw, it would be this. And as it's flipped over hit the x-axis and creates the matter in this world, it would trace out this thing as it goes around in a tight circle and tracing out a toroid shape. And 22 views of this toroid shape is the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, as I showed. When you look at the toroid, you're really looking at a vector. This is the vector that represents that carrier wave. It's at 37.34 degrees. The reciprocal is the 52.66 degrees. It's derived from this formula, 1 over the square root of e, the natural log. In video series 1, I explain why e to the x shows up in our reality, and much of this also. Anyway, what it's saying, now, Great Pyramid of Giza is based on this number, 52.66 degrees. They built that pyramid based on that formula. They're stating a philosophy of the universe. Here, it's what's saying 90 degrees out of phase from this vector is our matter world, and that's where it's formed. Keep that in mind. So those vectors create planes that are 90 degrees from each one of the vectors. And you can see it's a very organized pattern around here. This is going to be 0 degrees. There's none. It goes around like this. Every 45 degrees. It's very organized, and the top and the bottom. Look at the other language, the angles rather, which we'll be dealing with. These are like what I believe are the carrier waves. This is the information ones. So you can see 52 degrees is the reciprocal, but it's really the 37, the reciprocal angle here. Same thing goes over here. But this is just a review, a fast review of what I covered in 2C, 2B rather. Okay. So those, the 4 of the letters, the least used letters in the Torah, form this shape, and 8 of them form a full octahedron. And we'll mostly be dealing with this and the 10 letters. Now, this is kind of an important, it's a legend, but probably created by Moses. And I'll read it to you for those who have a cell phone and can't read this type. God already had the Torah with him in the form of all the letters before he created the world. But the letters were combined into words only afterwards, forming the Torah as we know it. Here's the reference for that. So, the Torah, for some of you, is like an onion. And the surface story is like the skin of the onion. Not much to it. The real story is inside of the thing. And that's how you have to look at this, at the Torah. That you're dealing with something that Moses didn't create. He only created a surface story. He created the Hebrew language from scratch by using these letters. Actually, sometimes the skip patterns of the letters within the Torah, especially in the Genesis part, you'll see that when I get to Moses and 10 code systems when I do that book. But that's what you have to remember. You almost forget the surface story, even though it does have clues to what this thing really is. Moses gives us the clue. I'm going to cover some of them in a few minutes. But you have to remember, you're dealing only with the symbols, not the surface story. Okay, the first analogy we're going to see, and this is one of the first ones I saw when I was replaced the letters for the planes, is the first one is transistors. Now, for those who don't know what a transistor looks like, that's a transistor. They also have them in CPUs too, and memory chips. But there's 2 types, NPN and PNP transistors, and this is the schematics for what they do. Basically, it induces a voltage here. Usually this goes to ground or someplace else. And here they're lined up so they're like a diode. But again, it's information going in and out and going someplace else. So, we'll start in. Now, I had to make a physical model to do this. Those of you who are computer scientists out there and physicists, please do an electronic model. Take the symbols from the Torah, put it in and see what the shapes look like as you play it out. Anyway, this is the word for sight or seeing. And you can see this pattern repeatedly. I put the arrows in here for a reason. So it goes across like this and induces something here. And this is one of the sides here you have to look at as carrier waves, but the ones below I think have to do with this dihold, which is this computer I think it's for. And the one above is when it's creating the 8 dimensions that we're in. So I thought I clarified. The first dimension is information. The second one is a transmission dimension. And then the third is inanimate matter. And then fourth, well, the atoms. The fourth dimension is us, any living thing. Fifth is something beyond like us. I explained it in, I think it was video 1D, the dimensions. 1C and 1D define all the 8 dimensions. And 6 is a being that has no body whatsoever. 7 is planets, and 8 are stars. And I divine the dimensions by how much potential it has and how much information it acquires, can manipulate, and access. A lot different from length, width, depth, and time, huh? Time is not one of the dimensions. It's involved with all the dimensions, so therefore it's not really another dimension. Okay, this is the word in the mount. Shows 629 times in the Torah. Very organized. Again, the same thing. This is the name This is the word for Abraham. It has a transmission dimension, and it has one that's inside the computer itself. Same letters. I also look for the pattern of how many words had the full top of this octahedron, and maybe a couple of the bottom ones. And these are some of the patterns I saw. This is again Bahar, but I found one or multiple words that had the whole top, all four sides, and two bottoms, and the same type of a thing. Same thing goes here, and different letters arranged differently. This kind of a shape you'll see when we're dealing with quantum computing shows up a lot of times. It's one of the schematics for it. This pattern, again, like the schematic for a transistor, 678 occurrences, 268 here. I'll just get out of the way. 201 for this pattern. You notice I'm going around the whole thing. This would be like the 0 degree, that would be the 80 degree back there, 90, 270. 351 occurrences like this. Its permutations and combinations of 3 is like 6 permutations and combinations. This one was very interesting. This is Vault of Heaven. This is the translation of the literal one of, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, or the firmament. Well, the real words, when you take them apart, means vault of heaven. And what do we have? We've got the full top and 2, I think, on the bottom, and a shin and a resh. Now, it's interesting. The Legend of the Jews say the resh is the first letter. And it's the second letter in the Torah, bet and then resh in the beginning. But I think that's maybe why they said it. Here's another one, the word for Jacob with a mim and a vav. Minimum vav, it shows up 28 times. Jacob shows up so many times it's kind of ridiculous. This is the word for Israel. You got 4 sides, 2 transmission sides, and 2 on the bottom. Again, a resh and the shin, just like vault of heaven. Here is the word for Moses with an L. Moses shows up 723 times, 193 with the L in front of it. Which is interesting. It's kind of, this kind of pattern is the same one that's in Vault of Heaven. Here's the word for Isaac, what it looks like. There's 2 faces over here. And the information goes back and forward, and you have something up on top, a letter up on top. This is where saying or speak, command. Again, going in and out, changing direction of a, look at this like light going in and hitting a crystal and changing and going in another direction. Here's the word, here's more common words. The word sight or seeing appearing about 340 times. It's also used for the word arc and sometimes cut off. Now this is where we start getting this pattern here. You will see when I show you the stuff for quantum computing. Again, here the word talk or report 296 times, 132 with resh in it. Resh is this letter back here. All very organized. Now, this is a schematic of a vacuum tube of a photomultiplier. Now, ironic, the vacuum tube ones are 100 million times more sensitive than the solid state photomultipliers. So I'm using this, but it's a good example. I accidentally clipped off the H here and P here, so this is a high energy photon here, comes here, or a low energy photons, goes through a gate, and then each one of these plates adds voltage to it, and it increases its signal strength. Hence, photomultiplier. I found 2, this one especially, Of the 8 letters, like it's 7 of them. It's all around here. The only one missing is over here. Aaron held out the rod. Interesting. These are the letters that make it up. This one is son of Zohar the Hittite. It's missing 2, but it goes all around with the top and the bottom information. Now those who are dealing with quantum computing may recognize some of the shapes, what it's forming, and get an idea. The idea I'm doing this is to help you. Okay, what's behind quantum computing? They noticed that light has a horizontal and vertical polarization. When you put it through a prism, you divide it, and then they count which ones make it out. That's the principle of it. So you have 0 or 1. In this case, you have 0 or 1 as a bit, and they're counting it. They probably seeing it because, back to my old graph, let's say there's a proton, that's a neutron. This distance between here and here is Planck's time, which is 3.6 times 10 to the minus 44 seconds. Really small pieces of time, shorter than we can perceive, but that's what's going on, at least by the theory of multidimensional reality. Here's a schematic of how it works. You can log on to Google and search for quantum computing and diagrams and read it, and you'll understand something of what's really going on. You'll see the similarities between them. Here's another schematic from a company. I have the company credited in the book. And you see a light beam goes up. It's reflected off probably a crystal, some kind of a counting device or filter, and the counters are over here. But that's a schematic roughly of how this thing works. So here's the word bondsman. And you see that same kind of pattern. Here's the word fear, combination 296 times. Here's the word arc or box. Again, the same kind of a pattern. I started then looking for just the letters and permutations and combinations of the 3 letters to see what I came up with. 238 occurrences, 306 for this, 148 for this, 377 occurrences for this one. I want to make a statement before I get onto this one. You have to understand that of these patterns that I found, they amount to about 2 to 3% of the total letters in the Torah. So you have a command, but you may also have operands and other things, information after it, but we don't know what that is. Next is repeated verses. I want to see if there's a bunch of verses that are repeated quite a few times, like it came to pass. This is a time thing. I've seen it as there, or a word that means time. In Genesis 116 times, then Exodus 42, and then kind of peters out. That was the most. After the birth of, 17 times, but only in Genesis. The Lord God said, not too many, 9 for whatever. The Lord spoke unto Moses, a total of 92 times. It mostly shows up starting here, Leviticus, and then Numbers. The Lord said to Moses, slight difference, only difference of 2 letters. 43, a total of 69 times. And if a man, with the word spelled with a shin in there, 30 times. Then this, Vav Aleph Yud Samek, total of 59 times. And I've seen like 5 or 6 or more different translations of this word. I mean, they don't know what to do with it, it seems. And then that last one, and he made, mostly showing up in Exodus, a little bit here. I graphed them to see if it shows up better. This is where I kind of gets interesting, becomes more visible at what's going on. And it came to pass, the time thing. A lot in Genesis, Exodus, and then peters out, nothing in Leviticus, some in Numbers, and then a little bit in Deuteronomy. After the birth of is the purple line, only shows up in Genesis and then drops out. Lord God said, the green one, not too much, and I did pull them out of the other one so there were no duplicates. And the Lord spoke to Moses, the red one, nothing in Genesis. Exodus, obviously, Leviticus, Numbers a lot, and then drops off to nothing here. So, and then the Lord said, anyway, here's the other words. Genesis, the only thing that was significant was, and if a man, well, is that the right color? No. And he made, in Exodus, this, drops down Leviticus, a little bit in Numbers. Notice it's kind of loaded down in, some of these loaded down in Genesis, and then Exodus, and then kind of peters off, and then something else rises in Leviticus and Numbers. Here's the indescript multiple translations. It shows up in all the books, but not all that much. Now, there are multiple paragraphs or verses that do repeat themselves. What is interesting about many of these is they were the very beginning word in a verse. And sometimes in some of them, in some of these, it was literally the first line, the first words in the chapter, a lot of them. And I have a feeling Moses was trying to tell us something about the pattern. Remember, I proved in the previous video, 2b, he's the one who created the chapters and verses, nobody else. He leaves the clues there for you. And we did get, and I also proved in that video, we got all 304,805 symbols. So he's telling us something by putting it in the very first chapter and verse, something about this code. You have to look at it as like code. You ignore the accent marks that were put on top and bottom. The Torah did not have any of that. They were just the symbols, and that's all. Okay, so this is what's interesting. These four letters that represent these four sides, this is rotated 45 degrees on the octahedron, don't show up at all in any of those repeated verses, not a one. And Zadi, it's the 9th, 19th, 20th, 21st, and 22nd letters of the Hebrew alphabet. This is the least used letter, the tet. Sonic, 21st. None of those showed up. Now, why? I think he may be telling us something of the construction of this, of the Torah. When you first start up a program, a computer, there's a BIOS program, and it basically goes out and maps the RAM memory, the I/O ports. It puts in an alphabet, so it starts reporting back on the screen what it's doing. What I think we have here is the beginning part, well, the beginning part of a computer program that's much larger. We only have 2 of the tablets. But the beginning part here has the very beginnings of the universe. Basically, it starts creating the structure of this dihold. The dihold is the computer that contains this information. And then it defines the elements, the building blocks of this reality. And the reason why I did to see how many of these verses were, I wanted to see if it matched the periodic table, the table of elements. If there were equal numbers, gave me the same idea. The only problem with that, the people who created this thing are tens of millions of years more advanced than us, and they may have grouped the atoms differently than our periodic table. In fact, I have several periodic tables that look different. Each group grouped them slightly different. They changed stuff. But we don't know. But it seems like the repeated verses and where they're located appear to be about the same thing. They seem to describe maybe the elements, and that's why it's kind of front-loaded, especially in Numbers and in Exodus. And I think some of those verses are basically saying something about each one of the elements. But I can't prove it yet, but someone with computer knowledge and graphics could maybe figure the thing out. Anyway, the next video is going to be, I'm going to explain what kind of computer this thing really is. Then the clues that Moses gave us, I'm going to go over what the clues are and what he was telling us this thing is. I'm going to be able to date this technology by the clues Moses gave us again in Genesis, in the Garden of Eden story. He's telling us the people who put this technology in the cave. And I'm going to tell you, I think, how this program works, including the sides of this thing. And I'm going to answer the three most difficult questions in the universe. Why was the universe created? If God created the universe, who created God? And finally, what is man's purpose in the universe? Anyway, I think I did this in a half an hour. That's not bad. Usually it takes me a little bit longer, but I wanted it within the half hour, and I think I did it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Please buy the book. There's a lot more information in the book, and I go into a greater detail and maybe a better explanation than what I'm doing in 20 or 25 minutes. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and please watch the next one. I'll get it done within a couple of days, and you're going to know it. You're going to know what I have figured out. Bye-bye.